The night was deep in the forests of Illinois. The trees enclosed the campsite in a tight circle, almost like a fortress. We were there, among friends, escaping the routine, ready for a worry-free weekend. No cell phones, no watches, just the campfire and the radio I had brought, playing some random tune and keeping the atmosphere comfortable. But there was something I couldn't ignore. "It's almost 3 in the morning," Alex remarked, glancing at the radio's clock with a puzzled expression. "It sounds kind of strange, isn't it?" When the hand struck 3, the radio began to crackle, and soon the music was replaced by a calm, precise voice. "In 10 minutes, the sky will be covered with dark clouds, and a figure will appear near Roy's campsite," the voice announced. "The only chance is to leave before it's too late." The message was directed at me. I tried to find some explanation, some logic that would make sense of it, but everything felt impossible. My friends exchanged confused glances. Who would leave a message like that? Alex laughed, skeptical. "Roy, did you program the radio?" I was frozen. The idea of coincidence was tempting, but there was no way to explain it. And it wasn't just the message's content. It was the tone, the way the voice sounded. Even as I tried to rationalize, something pulled me toward another conclusion. Jake looked at me, visibly uncomfortable. "Roy, are you okay? You're really quiet." Before I could respond, the voice came back, softer, but still clear. 5 minutes left. Now, everyone was silent. Alex's laughter faded, and a tense quiet settled over the group. No one said anything, but the glances they exchanged held the same question. Who or what could be sending that message? For a second, I thought about turning off the radio, but something stopped me. It was as if each word of that strange warning demanded our attention, keeping us rooted there. The embers of the campfire cast long shadows, and all of us, wordless, fixed our eyes on the radio as it delivered a final message. Now it's too late. My heart raced. I knew with inexplicable certainty that the message wasn't just a joke. I looked at my friends, hoping for some reaction that would ground me back in reality. Alex was silent, lost in thought. Jake avoided looking directly at me. Finally, Alex broke the silence, his voice tense. "Roy, you heard that too, right?" I nodded, trying to find a sensible answer, but the words just wouldn't come. Everyone knew without needing to say it. This was more than a coincidence. Despite knowing each other for years, that night exposed unknown sides of each of us, maybe even unsettling ones. Alex, always the skeptic, was now staring at the radio, not even trying to hide his tension. Jake, usually the fearless one in the group, was nervously adjusting the laces of his boots, as if he was about to stand up and run. Dave and Mike exchanged looks, trying to gauge if any of us knew what was happening. To me, being there was always a kind of escape ritual, a refuge from a daily life that was becoming increasingly predictable and meaningless. Maybe that was what drew me to this particular forest, the fact that it didn't promise answers, just the silence that, until then, had been comforting. But now I felt a fragility in the reasons that brought me here, something I might have avoided admitting even to myself. Why was I really here? And why did it feel like something or someone had planned this moment? My thoughts were interrupted when the radio crackled, drawing our eyes to it again. Dave murmured, almost voiceless, "Do you guys think this is some kind of prank? Something we missed?" The question sounded more like he was asking himself than asking us. If it is, who would pull one like this way out here in the middle of nowhere? I replied, trying to hide my nerves. We all knew the chances of someone finding our campsite, at this point in the forest, and at this time of night, were slim. Alex gave a forced laugh, a weak attempt to break the tension, but he soon fell silent, returning his gaze to the fire. The radio stayed quiet for a long time, but none of us dared move away from it. The fire was low, and even so, no one suggested gathering more wood. It seemed that any movement might disrupt this strange balance, and perhaps summon something we preferred to leave where it was. Finally, Jake, always the impulsive one, stood up abruptly. "If this is a prank, I'm out. Let's take a walk. See if there's anyone around who might be sending this thing." He grabbed the flashlight, but when his eyes met mine, he hesitated. "Roy, are you coming?" I looked around, considering. Part of me wanted to run as far as I could, away from anything involving that radio, but another part insisted on staying. I felt that, unsettling as it was, there was something I needed to understand. I took a deep breath. "I'll stay," I replied, trying not to show my internal conflict. "If this is some kind of test, I want to know the answer." Those who stayed by the campfire avoided exchanging glances, absorbing my decision in silence. The radio remained silent as Jake and Alex moved away, Jake's flashlight casting long shadows on the trees before disappearing into the darkness. The quiet that had once comforted us now felt suffocating, and every crackle from the fire sounded amplified. I watched the radio, hoping, maybe even wishing, that it would stay silent. But without warning, the static returned, a grating sound that cut through the air and made us all flinch. Then came a voice, so low and whispered it seemed to come from far away, from a place that shouldn't exist. "Roy, Roy." My friends stayed frozen, Dave's gaze fixed on me. It felt like they expected me to know what to do, as if this strangeness was somehow tied to me. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. They nodded, but no one dared to answer. The voice continued, and as it whispered my name, I felt a chilling certainty that whoever was on the other side knew exactly where we were. The tone, the pauses between each word, everything seemed calculated to provoke a reaction, and maybe the worst part was realizing it was working. Jake and Alex still hadn't returned, and I found myself wondering if something had happened to them. With the radio silent once more, the nervousness gradually turned into a sharper feeling, one that not even the presence of my friends could ease. "Maybe we should go look for them," Mike suggested, his voice tinged with uncertainty. No one disagreed, but at the same time, no one moved. We were frozen, torn between the urge to run and the need to uncover the truth. At some point, I mustered the courage and stood up, feeling the weight of the decision. I looked at Dave and Mike, trying to convey some confidence that I didn't actually feel. "Let's go find them. Maybe they're out there, just trying to figure out what's going on." We moved away from the campsite, flashlights on, taking cautious steps. Every sound in the forest felt like an invisible threat. Each snapping branch seemed louder than it should. In silence, we walked into the darkness, hoping to find Jake and Alex, but at the same time, dreading what we might actually find. We reached a clearing where the vegetation was thicker, and everything felt eerily quiet. I called out for Jake, my voice lost in the vastness around us, and the only response was a deeper silence, heavy, as if the forest itself was listening, holding on to its secrets. As we continued, the radio I was holding emitted another noise. This time, it wasn't a voice. It was the sound of footsteps in the vegetation, very close, the kind of sound you'd hear if someone was walking right beside us. We looked around, but we were alone, or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. The radio fell silent again, and Dave broke the quiet with a desperate murmur. "Roy, this doesn't make sense. We should go back to camp." I wanted to agree, but I knew something in me wouldn't allow it. Our footsteps echoed through the dense woods, the silence surrounding us like a living presence as we searched for any sign of Jake and Alex. Each of us was on high alert, listening for any sound, anything that might give us a clue about what was happening. With my flashlight in hand and the radio turned off for a moment, I felt an uncomfortable weight on the back of my neck, as if we were being closely watched, but by something or someone that knew exactly how to stay hidden. At a certain point, Mike stopped abruptly, his face pale in the flashlight's glow. "There are footprints here," he said, pointing to deep marks on the ground, as if someone had run through. "Looks like they went that way." As we investigated the footprints, the radio's voice returned, low and drawn out, yet unmistakably clear. It wasn't calling my name this time. It was something more unsettling, a whisper that described, with eerie precision, our every movement. 3 men walking in the forest, seeking answers they should never search for. The words fell over us like a dark revelation. It wasn't just a coincidence or a radio malfunction. There was an intelligence behind it, something that wasn't just watching us, but also understood what we were doing. Dave gripped my shoulder tightly, his face reflecting the same fear I felt. "Roy, we're being manipulated. Maybe this place? Maybe it's more than just an ordinary forest." Mike, who had stayed calm until now, seemed on the verge of losing control. What if this is something that's always been here? Something that waited, and now it's chosen us. Before I could respond, something glinted ahead of us. It was a leather bracelet, the same one Jake always wore. It was lying on the ground near a tree marked with deep scratches, as if some animal or something worse had passed through. I picked up the bracelet, feeling the cold leather in my hand, and a shiver ran through me. That small discovery brought a sense of urgency. And yet, a doubt grew within me. Something about all this didn't make sense, as if the forest was guiding us, revealing clues that kept us within an invisible maze. With each step, each new discovery, the feeling that we were being led, almost like pieces in a game, grew stronger. "We need to get out of here, Roy," Dave insisted, his voice almost pleading. "None of this is normal. Do you think it's a coincidence that the radio knows our steps?" I looked at the radio, now silent, and at the bracelet in my hand. Something inside me hesitated, a part that needed answers, even if it meant confronting the inexplicable. If we leave now, we may never know what happened to them. But if we keep going, we might find something beyond what we expected. The uncertainty hung between us, and the decision to press on felt as much like a choice as a trap. It was no longer just about finding Jake and Alex. It was as if we were being led to some destination, a place that wanted us to uncover something terrible. After several minutes of walking, we came across a hidden clearing among the trees. In the center stood an old wooden cabin, overgrown with moss and vines. It looked abandoned for decades, but at the same time, there was something disturbingly current about its presence, as if someone was still there. I exchanged a look with Mike and Dave, seeing the same terror that filled me reflected in their faces. "This wasn't on the map," I murmured, trying to process what was before us. Suddenly, the radio crackled back to life, emitting a loud, deep tone, like a voice coming from somewhere very far away, or perhaps from a time that wasn't our own. You came too far. There are things here that should have been forgotten." The words came in fragments, but their threat was clear. Dave took a step back, shaking his head. "Roy, we have to leave. This isn't natural. It shouldn't be happening." The sound of footsteps coming from inside the cabin made us freeze. Someone or something was moving in there. The cabin door creaked, opening slowly, revealing only darkness inside. I took a deep breath and signaled for Mike and Dave to stay behind me. I didn't know what to expect, but at the same time, I knew I couldn't leave without understanding what was happening here. As I crossed the threshold of the cabin, the smell of mold and old wood filled my nose. My eyes slowly adjusted to the dark, And as my flashlight scanned the room, I saw what looked like drawings on the walls, strange symbols, and something that seemed like an altar in the center, surrounded by worn-down candles. Before I could process what I was seeing, a low sound, like a faint laugh, echoed through the room. It was a laugh that didn't sound like it came from a human being, but from something mimicking a human voice. "You shouldn't be here." But now it's too late. I felt adrenaline surge, every muscle in my body begging me to get out of there. Dave, usually calm, was now visibly shaken, and Mike looked as if he was in shock, staring fixedly at the altar, as if he was seeing something he couldn't look away from. We left the cabin with hurried steps, senses heightened and hearts racing. Dave was pale, and Mike had a distant, vacant look in his eyes, as if his mind was still trapped inside that cabin. No one said a word. A few meters later, we heard a sound behind us, footsteps that weren't ours. I stopped, grabbing Dave's arm so he would stop too. We looked back, but the darkness of the forest was thick, and the flashlight seemed unable to penetrate it. Suddenly, a shadow moved in the distance. It wasn't an animal or one of our friends. The way it moved was unsettling. Even from afar, its presence filled us with a sense of oppression, as if we were being watched. We have to get out of here," I whispered, breaking the silence. Mike didn't move. His face was locked in a vacant, empty stare, as if he had seen something he couldn't process. I tugged on his arm, forcing him to react. "Mike, this isn't the time for that. We need to get out of here quickly." As soon as he took the first step, we heard the radio again, now broadcasting with chilling clarity. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last. The forest accepts you, and now you belong to it," the message repeated several times, each word pressing a heavier weight onto our shoulders. As we moved further away, I noticed Dave looking at the radio in my hand, panic in his eyes. "Roy, turn it off. We can't let it follow us. Throw that radio away now." I hesitated for a second, but that voice, that certainty that we were being watched, that something held us, made me obey. I threw the radio to the ground, but the sound continued to echo among the trees, as if it had already infiltrated our minds, as if the radio was merely a channel, not the source. We kept walking, but the exhaustion and fear began to take their toll. The feeling that something was pursuing us was intense, and although we couldn't clearly see anything, we knew we weren't alone. The night was darker, the radio's sound still echoing in our minds, even though it was now far behind. I found myself forcing concentration, searching for a way out while exhaustion and fear pressed down on us. "Roy," Dave spoke softly beside me, his voice weak but determined. "We need to find a way to think clearly. This place is messing with our minds, turning us against each other." I nodded in agreement. We needed to get organized, to create a plan, even if nothing made sense. Mike, walking right behind us, was muttering to himself, as if trying to keep steady. I stopped and turned to him. "Look, Mike," I said, keeping my voice firm. "If we fall apart now, we're lost. Let's stay together and find a way out. We've been on this trail before, remember? We just need to stay focused." He nodded, as if those words had, at least for a moment, broken through the panic in his eyes. We started walking again, and I realized that with each step, something inside me was changing. The fear was still there, but instead of paralyzing me, it seemed to be pushing me forward, giving me an unexpected strength. Dave took my flashlight, shining it further ahead. "There's an incline there. Maybe a higher view will help us see a path." With a mix of determination and reluctance, we headed up the small rise. The forest seemed less dense there, and the silence, though disturbing, gave us a strange sense of focus. When we reached the top, I looked around and saw a clearing illuminated by the faint light of the moon. "It's that way," I said, pointing. "If we cross the clearing, we might reach the main trail." We knew it was risky, but we also knew staying where we were was not an option. We advanced toward the clearing, our steps silent, as if any noise might awaken something dormant in the forest. Each of us kept our breathing steady, fighting against the growing panic, but our eyes met from time to time, as if this was enough to reassure ourselves we were all still present, still united against the fear surrounding us. "Roy," Dave said, his voice low and cautious, "do you think there's really a way out?" I looked at him, understanding that his question was much deeper than the simple possibility of returning. We were more on edge than ever, and even the clearing seemed charged with a subtle and unpredictable danger. I took a deep breath, considering our few options and the way the forest seemed to react to every attempt we made to escape. I don't know, Dave, but we're alive, and that means we still have a chance. We just have to keep going." At that moment, we heard a faint crack coming from the trees. We all turned in the same direction, and for an instant, silence reclaimed its hold. But slowly, we began to feel a presence approaching, an almost palpable sensation that something was watching us, waiting for the right moment to act. "Let's stick together," I told them, struggling to maintain control. "No matter what happens, no one gets left behind." The sound of the radio suddenly echoed again, breaking the silence and seizing our attention like a death sentence. The trembling, distorted voice announced something in a monotonous tone, each word hammering at our sanity. "You're almost there. Just one more step, and you'll be where you're meant to be." We looked at each other, fear stamped on our faces. "Don't listen to it," Dave said, his voice strained, though he himself couldn't tear his gaze away from the radio, as if hypnotized. I wanted to throw it far away, to smash it and silence that voice forever. But before I could do anything, a pale, faint light illuminated a spot ahead of us. We all stared, feeling ice run through our veins. It was a cabin, hidden among the trees, appearing like a terrible mirage in the heart of the forest. The structure looked ancient, collapsing under its own weight. The door was slightly ajar, an invitation that echoed in our minds, as if we'd been waiting for this moment all our lives. "This is it," Tom said, almost in a whisper. "This is where we have to go." I felt a mixture of terror and resignation, as if fate were inescapable. I led the group toward the cabin. Inside, I looked at the faces of my friends, all frozen with fear. The radio still in my hand emitted one last sound, a final voice, filled with horrifying certainty. "Welcome to your new home." At that instant, the door slammed shut, sealing us in absolute darkness. The darkness was complete. The sound of the radio had stopped entirely, leaving us in an eerie silence. Feeling around, I realized that everyone was still there, silent, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Tom murmured softly, his voice trembling, This doesn't make sense." "We need to get out of here," I agreed. But when I tried to open the door, I realized something was holding it shut. Dave began pounding on the walls, trying to find a way out, but they were solid. I heard footsteps coming from somewhere inside. I looked at my friends, hoping they had heard it too. Everyone seemed petrified, eyes wide with fear. "Who's there?" I shouted. No response, only the sound of footsteps, closer now. I took a deep breath, gathering the last bit of courage I had, and stepped toward the sound. But when I touched one of the walls, I felt something wet. I pulled back, trying to understand, but then the radio flickered back on, illuminating for a moment what was around us. The cabin was covered in scratches on the walls, names scratched in, desperate messages left by others. And among the scrawls, I recognized a familiar name. Mine. I never went back to that forest, and I never saw any of my friends again after that night. The authorities called it an accidental disappearance, something vague and meaningless. They listen to my story, nod, but no one believes me. When I try to sleep, all I can hear are the announcements, like distant echoes in my mind. And every time the clock strikes a.m., my body reacts heart racing, senses on edge, waiting for something. Some nights, I turn on the radio, and as the silence stretches, I wonder, what if, one day, I hear that voice again?